Welcome back to Key Safety Talks, everyone. Today, we're really getting into it, diving deep into the world of safety training. You sent over some fascinating materials, a practical guide for safety professionals, research on adult learning, even some eye-opening statistics on what makes training stick. It's like we've got a whole safety training toolkit here.
It is a remarkable collection, and I think it underscores just how much thought and planning goes into creating training that actually makes a difference, changes behaviors and prevents incidents.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I guess let's start with the foundation. We always hear that training needs to be engaging, but I'm curious, what does that actually mean in practice when we're talking about something like lockout, tagout procedures? It's not exactly a stand-up comedy routine.
You're right, it's not. And that's where understanding how adults learn is so crucial. It's easy to fall into the trap of treating all training participants like they're, fresh out of high school.
Yeah.
But the reality is adults come to training with years of experience, often very specific ways of learning, and let's be honest, a limited amount of patience for anything that feels like a waste of their time.
Okay, I've definitely been in those trainings where I'm checking my watch every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing there's more to it than just keeping people entertained.
Absolutely. Think about it. Adults are goal-oriented. They want to know, how is this going to help me do my job better? How will this keep me and my coworkers safe? If the training doesn't tap into that inherent motivation, we're fighting an uphill battle from the start.
So it's not just about delivering information, it's about connecting that information to their everyday reality.
Precisely. For example, instead of just listing the steps of lockout tagout, what if we presented a case study of a tragic incident where someone was seriously injured because the procedure wasn't followed? The 2010 Tesoro refinery explosion, for instance. Inadequate lockout procedures were a major contributing factor to that fatal accident. That kind of real-world example grabs people's attention and shows the very real consequences of what we're talking about.
Wow, yeah, that's a sobering example. Suddenly those procedures don't seem so abstract anymore. It's about preventing another Tesoro.
Exactly. And that's where those retention rate statistics you mentioned become so fascinating. Simply listening to someone lecture, we might only retain about 10% of the information. But if we're actively involved practicing by doing that, that number jumps to 75%.
Okay, so if we're teaching forklift safety, for example, it's not enough to just show a PowerPoint presentation. We need to get people behind the wheel in a controlled environment, of course, and actually let them experience how to operate the equipment safely.
Precisely. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The most effective way to learn with a 90% retention rate is by teaching others.
Whoa, 90%! So if I'm training someone else on a procedure, I'm solidifying that knowledge in my own mind at the same time. That's amazing.
It is. Think about it. When you have to explain something to someone else, you have to truly understand it yourself. You have to break it down, anticipate questions, and find ways to make it clear and concise. That active processing really cements the learning.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Engaging adult learners is about tapping into their motivations, connecting the information to real-world consequences, and giving them opportunities to actively participate and even teach others. That's a far cry from the sit-and-get training sessions I've endured in the past.
You got it. And that brings us to the next critical step. How do we actually build a training program that incorporates all of these principles?
All right, so let's say I'm tasked with creating a brand new safety training program from scratch. Where do I even begin?
You start with a solid foundation, just like building a house. And that foundation is the needs analysis.
Needs analysis. Okay, so that's figuring out what kind of training is actually needed. Right. To be honest, I've been guilty of skipping this step in the past, thinking, oh, everyone needs to know about ladder safety, so let's just create a training on that.
It's a common temptation, but without a needs analysis, you risk wasting time and resources on training that's irrelevant or ineffective. Or even worse, you might miss the root cause of the problem altogether.
Okay, can you give me an example? Where have you seen this go wrong in the real world?
Well, one example that comes to mind is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Investigations revealed that a lack of proper training on well-controlled procedures was a significant contributing factor to the disaster. Now imagine if BP had just thrown more generic safety training at the problem. They might have ticked a box, but they wouldn't have addressed the specific knowledge gaps that led to that catastrophic event.
Wow, yeah, that's a stark reminder that training needs to be laser-focused on the specific hazards and risks of the workplace. So how do we actually conduct a needs analysis? What does that process look like?
There are a few different approaches, but they all aim to identify the gap between what people know and what they need to know to perform their jobs safely. You can analyze tasks, observe workers, and action review incident reports, and even analyze the overall safety culture of the organization.
Okay, so it's not just sitting in a conference room brainstorming. It's about getting out there, and understanding the real work environment, the specific tasks people are performing, and the challenges they're facing.
Exactly. And a well-conducted needs analysis might even reveal that training isn't the solution at all. Maybe the issue is faulty equipment, unclear communication, or a lack of management commitment to safety.
I once worked at a place where there was a constant problem with people tripping over extension cords in a high-traffic area. They kept talking about providing slip trip and fall training, but the real solution was to just install proper wiring and eliminate the hazard altogether.
That's a perfect example. Sometimes the best solution isn't about changing people's behavior. It's about changing the environment itself.
Okay, so let's say our needs analysis confirms that training are the right solution. We know who our audience is, what they need to learn, and the specific context of their work. What's the next step in building our training program?
The next step is to establish clear, measurable objectives. What do you want people to be able to do after the training? Not just regurgitate facts, but apply those facts in a real-world scenario.
So it's not just about knowledge, it's about skills and ultimately behavior change.
Exactly. And this is where we use the SMART acronym to guide us. Objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay, break that down for me. Give me a safety-related example of a SMART objective.
Let's say we're developing a training on fire extinguisher use. A SMART objective might be: after completing the training, participants will be able to correctly identify the type of fire extinguisher needed for a Class A fire and demonstrate the PASS technique to extinguish the fire within 60 seconds.
Okay, I see how that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's definitely a far cry from a vague objective like, be more fire safety conscious.
Exactly. Vague objectives lead to vague results. We need that clarity to guide our training development and to be able to measure its effectiveness.
So we've got our needs analysis, our SMART objectives. What's next on the training blueprint?
Next, we need to create a detailed course outline. This is our roadmap for the training. Outlining the topics will cover the sequence, the activities, and the materials we'll use.
So if we're sticking with our fire extinguisher example, our outline might include modules on fire classifications, extinguisher types, the PASS technique, hands-on practice, and maybe even a scenario-based simulation.
That's a great example. And within each module, we'll map those specific learning objectives we defined earlier, ensuring that every activity and piece of content aligns with those goals.
It's all coming together now.
Yeah.
We're moving from a broad concept to a concrete plan, a blueprint for building a training program that actually works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that blueprint will guide us as we make some critical decisions about how we'll actually deliver the training. Because as we've discussed, simply presenting information isn't enough. We need to choose methods that engage adult learners, promote active participation, and ultimately lead to lasting behavior change.
Okay, so let's talk about those delivery methods. You mentioned instructor-led, self-paced, and on-the-job training earlier. What are the key differences, and how do we choose the right approach for our specific needs?
Well, each method has its strengths and weaknesses, and the best choice often depends on factors like the complexity of the topic, the size of the audience, the budget, and the desired learning outcomes. Instructor-led training, the classic classroom setting, allows for real-time interaction, clarification, and feedback. It's particularly effective for topics that require in-depth explanation or hands-on practice.
So something like confined space entry, where you need to demonstrate proper procedures, equipment use, and emergency response protocols. It's hard to imagine learning that effectively just from reading a manual.
Exactly. But instructor-led training can also be time-consuming and costly, especially for large organizations or geographically dispersed workforces. That's where self-paced learning comes in. This approach, often delivered online, allows individuals to learn at their own speed and convenience.
Okay, so for something like hazard communication, where you need to understand the globally harmonized system and how to read safety data sheets, a self-paced online module could be really effective. People can work through the material at their own pace, revisit sections as needed, and test their knowledge along the way.
Precisely. It's a flexible and cost-effective option, but it does require a certain level of self-motivation and discipline from the learner. And it's not ideal for topics that require hands-on skill development or complex problem-solving.
Right. You can't learn how to operate a crane or perform CPR just by clicking through an online module.
Exactly. And that brings us to on-the-job training, which, as the name suggests, takes place in the actual work environment. It's the most hands-on and context-specific approach, allowing individuals to learn by doing under the guidance of an experienced mentor.
So this this would be ideal for apprenticeships, for example, or for jobs that require a high level of technical expertise and hands-on skill.
Precisely. Think of a welder learning to perform a specific type of weld. They need that direct supervision feedback and gradual exposure to the real-world challenges of the job.
Okay, so we've got three main delivery methods: instructor-led, self-paced, and on-the-job. But I'm guessing it's not always an either-or situation. Could we use a blend of these approaches?
Absolutely. In fact, that's often the most effective strategy. You could start with a self-paced online module to cover the basic theory, and then follow up with instructor-led training for hands-on practice and group discussion. Or you could use on-the-job training to reinforce skills learned in a classroom setting.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job, or in this case, the right blend of tools to create a comprehensive and engaging learning experience.
Exactly. And once we've made those decisions about delivery methods, we can move on to the next exciting stage of training development, creating the materials themselves.
Okay, so now we're talking about those PowerPoints, handouts, video simulations, and all the other stuff that brings the training to life. What are some key considerations when developing materials that are both effective and engaging?
Well, just like everything else we've discussed, it all comes back to those adult learning principles. We need materials that are relevant, practical, and visually appealing. We need to incorporate real-world examples, case studies, and even a touch of humor to keep people interested and involved.
So no more death by PowerPoint. We need to ditch the bullet points and embrace a more creative, multimedia approach.
Exactly. Think about using videos, interactive quizzes, group activities, even games or simulations to make the learning process more dynamic and memorable. And don't be afraid to incorporate storytelling.
Storytelling. How does that fit into safety training?
Think about it. Humans are wired for stories.
Yeah.
We connect with narratives, we remember them, and we learn from them.
So instead of just listing the steps for conducting a job safety analysis, we could present a case study of a near-miss incident and have participants analyze what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and how to apply those lessons to their own work.
Precisely. Stories bring the information to life, make it relatable, and help people see the real-world consequences of their actions.
Okay, I'm starting to see how we can move beyond those dry technical training sessions and create something that's actually engaging and impactful. It's got a lot to think about.
We do. And we haven't even touched on the crucial step of testing and evaluation, which is how we'll know if our training is actually hitting the mark. But I think that's a conversation for another time.
All right, we'll have to save that for part 2. But for now, I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding the key principles of effective safety training. We've talked about the importance of understanding adult learners, conducting a thorough needs analysis, setting smart objectives, and choosing the right delivery methods.
We have indeed. And I think it's clear that creating truly effective safety training is both a science and an art. It requires careful planning, a deep understanding of human behavior, and a willingness to think outside the box.
I agree. And as we move forward in this conversation, I'm excited to delve deeper into the specific strategies and techniques that can help us transform safety training from a compliance exercise into a truly engaging and impactful learning experience.
So picking up where we left off, let's dive a little deeper into this idea of crafting engaging training materials. We've talked about relevance and visual appeal, but there's really an art to it. It's like, how do we make safety procedures as captivating as, say, the latest blockbuster?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, I love a good action movie, but I'm not sure I'd ever use the word captivating to describe a safety manual.
Right, and that's the challenge, isn't it? But think about what makes those movies so engaging. It's the storytelling, the suspense, the characters we connect with. We can actually borrow those same techniques and apply them to safety training.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Yeah.
How do we tell a story about something like, I don't know, hazard communication?
All right, let's imagine you're training workers on the dangers of chemical exposure. Instead of just listing the symptoms of overexposure, what if you presented a fictional scenario? A worker who ignores the warning labels, doesn't wear proper PPE, and ends up with a serious health condition. Suddenly, it's not just abstract information, it's a human story with real consequences.
Yeah, that's a powerful way to make it personal.
Right.
Suddenly, those safety data sheets aren't just pieces of paper anymore. They're tools to protect themselves and their families.
Exactly. And you can even weave in real-life case studies. For example, the Bhopal gas tragedy. One of the worst industrial disasters in history is a chilling reminder of what can happen when hazard communication breaks down.
Wow, that's a heavy example, but it definitely drives home the point.
Yeah.
So, storytelling case studies. What else can we do to make training materials more engaging?
Think about incorporating interactive elements. Instead of just passively listening to a presentation, get people involved. Ask questions. Have them work through scenarios. Use quizzes or games to reinforce key concepts.
Okay, so it's about turning the training into a two-way conversation, a more active learning experience.
Precisely. And let's not forget about the power of visuals. A well-designed infographic can convey complex information much more effectively than a wall of text. And videos can be incredibly powerful tools, especially for demonstrating procedures or showcasing real-world examples.
Right, a picture's worth 1,000 words and a video's probably worth 1,000,000. But I'm guessing it's not just about throwing in random pictures and videos. There's a strategy to it, right?
Absolutely. Visuals need to be relevant, high quality, and strategically chosen to support the learning objectives. Think about using visuals to illustrate concepts, for instance. Diagrams, charts, and illustrations can help make abstract ideas more concrete. Or to demonstrate procedures, step-by-step videos can guide learners through complex tasks. And of course, to evoke emotions, powerful images or video footage can connect with learners on an emotional level and make the training more memorable.
Okay, so it's about using visuals purposefully, not just for decoration. And we also need to make sure our materials are accessible, right? Clear, concise, easy to understand for everyone, regardless of their learning style or any disabilities they may have.
That's a crucial point. We need to use plain language, avoid jargon, provide transcripts for videos, and offer alternative formats as needed.
So it's about being inclusive and making sure everyone has equal access to the information. You know, speaking of access, I'm curious about your thoughts on computer-based training, or CBT as it's often called. It seems like that's becoming increasingly popular, especially with the rise of online learning platforms.
CBT is definitely a powerful tool, and it has a lot to offer in terms of flexibility, cost-effectiveness, and accessibility. It allows learners to access training from anywhere at any time, and it can be easily customized to meet specific needs.
But are there any drawbacks to CBT? Does it always live up to the hype?
Well, like any training method, CBT has its pros and cons. One potential drawback is the lack of face-to-face interaction. Some learners really thrive in a classroom setting where they can ask questions, participate in discussions, and get immediate feedback from an instructor.
Right, that social learning element can be really valuable. And I imagine there's also a risk of people just clicking through an online module without really engaging with the material.
That's a valid concern. That's why it's crucial to design CBT modules that are interactive, engaging, and incorporate elements of gamification assessments and real-world scenarios to keep learners actively involved.
Okay, so it's not just about putting a PowerPoint presentation online and calling it CBT. It requires a thoughtful design approach to maximize its effectiveness.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that CBT is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It may not be appropriate for every topic or every learner. For example, if you're teaching hands-on skills like operating a forklift or performing CPR, CBT alone won't be sufficient. You'll need to combine it with in-person training and practical exercises.
So it's about choosing the right blend of delivery methods to create a comprehensive and engaging learning experience. Speaking of engagement, let's talk about testing and evaluation. How do we know if our training is actually working? How do we measure its effectiveness?
Ah, yes. The moment of truth, testing and evaluation are crucial components of any training program, but they're often misunderstood. It's not about trying to trick people or make them feel bad. It's about gathering data to assess whether the training is achieving its objectives and identifying areas for improvement.
Okay, so it's a continuous improvement process, a way to make sure our training is always evolving and getting better.
Exactly. And there are a variety of methods we can use, from pre-tests and post-tests to observation surveys and even performance reviews.
Okay, break that down for me. What are the different types of testing and how do they work?
Well, let's start with pre-tests. These are assessments given before the training to gauge learners' existing knowledge and identify any gaps. They can help us tailor the training to the specific needs of the audience.
So if everyone scores really high on the tree test, it might mean we can skip some of the basic material and focus on more advanced concepts.
Exactly. And if people are struggling with certain topics, we know we need to spend more time on those areas.
Makes sense. What about post-tests? Are those just the same test given again after the training?
They can be, but it's often more effective to design post-tests that focus on application rather than just rote memorization. For example, instead of asking learners to simply list the steps of a procedure, we could present them with a real-world scenario and ask them to describe how they would apply the procedure in that situation.
Okay, so it's about testing their ability to use the knowledge and skills in a practical setting.
Precisely. And don't forget about observations. We can observe learners during the training or even in the workplace to see if they're applying what they've learned.
So for example, if we're training people on proper lifting techniques, we could observe them performing those lifts in the field to see if they're using the correct form and following the safety protocols.
Exactly. And we can also use surveys to gather feedback from learners about their experience with the training. Did they find it engaging? Did they feel like they learned valuable information? Were there any areas that could be improved?
That's valuable data. It's giving learners a voice and helping us identify any blind spots in our training design.
Exactly. And finally, we can even incorporate training evaluation into performance reviews. We can assess whether learners are applying the skills and knowledge they've gained on the job, and whether the training has had a positive impact on their overall performance.
Okay, so we're coming full circle. We're connecting the training back to the real world and measuring its impact on actual job performance. That's a powerful way to demonstrate the value of training and make the case for continued investment in employee development.
Exactly. And remember, testing and evaluation are not just about measuring success, they're also about identifying areas where we can do better. It's a continuous improvement process that helps us ensure that our training programs are always evolving and meeting the changing needs of our workforce.
I love that. It's a reminder that learning is a lifelong journey, and that we should always be striving to improve our skills and knowledge.
Absolutely. And when it comes to safety training, that commitment to continuous learning can literally save lives.
You know, as we wrap up all this talk about safety training, it really strikes me that we've covered a ton of ground, from the nitty-gritty details of needs analysis to the more creative side of things, like storytelling and using visuals. It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've really gone deep, haven't we? But there's one crucial element I think we haven't fully explored yet, and that's the role of the trainer themselves.
Yes, the human element. It's easy to get caught up in the logistics and the theory of training design, but we can't forget that it's ultimately people who bring that training to life.
Exactly. A skilled trainer can make even the most mundane safety procedure, engaging, even memorable, while a less effective trainer can make even the most exciting topic fall completely flat.
Okay, so what makes for a truly great safety trainer? Is it just about being a good public speaker?
Well, public speaking is definitely part of it, but it's much more than that, I think. A great safety trainer is someone who's passionate about safety, first and foremost. They're knowledgeable about the subject matter, of course, but they're also able to connect with the audience on a personal level.
So it's about being a subject matter expert, a communicator, a bit of a psychologist, all rolled into one.
Yeah, you could say that. They need to be able to break down complex information, make it relevant to the learner's experiences, and create a safe and supportive learning environment.
And don't forget enthusiasm.
Yeah.
A trainer who's genuinely excited about safety can be contagious. Their passion can really inspire learners and make the training more enjoyable for everyone.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm is key, but it has to be authentic. Learners can spot a fake a mile away.
Right. So no cheesy grins or forced excitement. It's about that genuine spark that comes from, really believing in the importance of what you're teaching.
Precisely. And here's something else to consider. A great safety trainer is also a lifelong learner. They're always seeking out new information, keeping up with industry trends, refining their skills.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The world of safety is constantly evolving, so trainers need to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And they need to be adaptable. Every audience is different. So a good trainer can adjust their style and approach to meet the specific needs of the learners.
So it's not about having a one-size-fits-all training style. It's about being flexible and responsive.
Precisely. And finally, a great safety trainer is someone who genuinely cares about the well-being of the learners. They're not just there to deliver information. They're there to make a difference.
That's a great point. It's about seeing training as more than just a compliance exercise. It's about empowering people with the knowledge and skills they need to stay safe and healthy.
Well said. When we invest in developing great safety trainers, we're really investing in the safety and well-being of our entire workforce.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, explored so many valuable insights, and hopefully sparked some new ideas for our listeners.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and with everyone tuning in.
And to all of you out there responsible for safety training in your workplaces, remember that you have the power to make a real difference. By applying the principles we've discussed, embracing creativity, and always striving for improvement, you can create training programs that engage, inspire, and ultimately save lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you for joining us on Key Safety Talks. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.